don't need one because we're not making decisions. So we will get started so that we can get underway. Yes. Oh, good. There we go. And if we did, we now do. It's like the opposition and the government. I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 16th of March 2021 held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco open at 5:34 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff, the media and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of this area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Welcome everyone. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed, and so by being present, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings will be made available on the city's website following the meeting. Of course, the confidential sections of the meeting will not be live streamed nor recorded. So we'll go to item 2, attendance, apologies and leave of absence. I have a number of apologies from Councillor Mansfield, Councillor Rowe, Councillor McMullen and Councillor Phelan. Has anyone heard from Councillor Powell? Oh, he's coming in. He's called saying he couldn't make it tonight. Our next item is point 3, disclosures of interest. Do we have any disclosures of interest for tonight? Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I, Angela Hammersley, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on 16 March 2021, agenda item C10. Type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct Regulations 2007. The nature of my interest is my husband was one of the people who signed the proposal that Council consider changing the method of election of the Mayor. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register. Thank you.
Any further declarations or disclosures? Councillor Hammersley, are you just filling in your disclosure? Does the administration need a copy? So, councillors, we'll move straight into reports of committees and officers. Just keeping in mind that they're not for discussion, they're just for questions for staff to answer any questions councillors may have. So, councillors, all the decisions in the upcoming meeting on the Audit and Finance Committee that have come via the Audit and Finance Committee have yet to be circulated to councillors. So unless there was any questions on those, I'll move straight to C2, the officers' reports. So questions on C1? Any questions on C1? Councillor De Vries?
Just a quick question. I think it's pretty apparent in the report, but it does say in the report about the development, Bagot Road, which number Bagot Road, I beg your pardon, number 138. In that amended approval that it would be a fixed, obscured or translucent glass. Does that mean it would be a glass? Because I'm not quite sure what you mean. Does that mean the glass will be, so you won't be able to see through that glass? Is that what it means? I'm not quite sure. So it's a fixed vertical screening with openings. So does that mean there'd be no vision from the stairwell to the neighbouring, overlooking to the neighbouring properties? Sorry, I wasn't very clear with the question, but I hadn't quite framed it.
Sure. On page 5 of our agendas, we have that the amended application documentation was received illustrating privacy screening to a portion of the stairwell windows on the east elevation. Specifically, it talks about the screening further on. Did you want to expand on that, Manager for Planning Services?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, just quickly on the plans, it's indicated as a 75% impermeable laser cut privacy screen. That condition is standard so that there are a number of options, but in this instance, they've indicated on the plans.
Further questions on C1? I'll move to C2 then. Any questions on C2? 3 to 5 Rawson Street, Subiaco. Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. It's on page 17 of the agenda at the bottom. I just wanted to check the variation on the setback in the right-of-way. Is this a sort of consistent approach taken with the variations for that particular setback?
Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, in many instances in Subiaco, our right-of-ways are sometimes smaller than you probably would have, so each application is considered on its merit, and in this we actually rely on the engineering review from our Transport Infrastructure Development team. So yes, it's a consistent method of doing it, to rely on engineering advice to make sure that we can have a solution that works.
Any further questions on C2? If not, I'll move to C3. C3, Draft Rockaby Road South Local Development Plan Approval Post Advertising. Questions on C3? Councillor Hammersley.
Yes, thank you. I'm just looking on page 26 of the agenda, and it's halfway down the page, floor to ceiling heights adaptive use, and the DRP recommended a change to a minimum of 4 metres to ceiling heights for the purposes of future adaptive use. And it says 2 references to the floor to ceiling heights are recommended to be modified from 3.3 metres to 4 metres as per the DRP recommendations. So I just wanted to check, I think that is 3.6 and 5.1. Can I just confirm that that's the 2 references that we're looking at?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, I think it's correct in 3.6, and I'll just have a look at 5.1. Yes, that's correct, and also in 5.1.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm looking at the attachments. This is attachment 3 to C3, and it's PDF page 187 of the 940 pages of attachments that go with our agenda. So halfway down there, we've got number 16, 3 depth, and the note says modification for consistency with the city's DRP recommendation, the reference to 3.3 metre floor to ceiling is inconsistent with the advice, and they recommended it to 4. I'm just wondering, and maybe need to go to the other things to answer this, but is this just relating to the ground floor, or is this something general where we be proposing that floors be no less than 4 metres at every level?
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, yes, it only relates to the ground floor, and what that allows for is for a mix of either residential or commercial uses that may change as times go by.
So just to finish off then, so having a look at the actual LDP, so I'm on PDF page 104 of 940. So that's the 3.6, which is talking about building depth. So that increase to the 4 metres on the ground floor doesn't carry up, I gather from what you've just said, that doesn't carry up to the subsequent floors. And then when we go to 5.1, which is on PDF 115, I think that's pretty clear because it says residential land uses on the ground floor. So it's really more 3.6, the PDF 104. When I read that paragraph that says where the floor-to-floor heights of the residential component of a building are not less than 4 metres and the frontage of the lot is not more than 15 metres, the maximum building depth may be increased. So I've actually found that quite hard to read, but I presume it's more to do with building depth than overall building height. But I was just checking, is that clear to us that that doesn't carry the extra height right through the building? Thank you.
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, that only relates to the building depth objective under the R Codes Volume 2. So you wouldn't be able to take that as increasing the floor to ceiling height for the entire building. So it only relates to the objective 2.6.1 and doesn't purport to increasing the floor to ceiling heights. That's covered by another element objective.
Any further questions, Councillor Powell?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Quite a bit of feedback. I have a couple of questions on this. On page 25, 3.5 plot ratio, it refers to a table by which you can gain for the plot ratios, which then is on page 104 of the attachments. Now, reading through that, it seems like the basic plot ratio was 1.5, but then there are methods by which you can achieve 2.5, but all combined, you cannot get more than a plot ratio of 2.5. However, there is also a spot, I think, at the very end, which says about about 0.62, that there may be an ability through the use of perhaps, I think, contributing to the laneways of actually getting up to closer to 3. Is that correct? Plot ratio of 3?
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, that's only in certain circumstances where there might be seeding of laneways. So to not have a financial burden on people who might need to cede land for a laneway, what we've done is we've reallocated that portion of land as plot ratio back to the development site. So you can have a small increase in that area, but you are also increasing the space around the building with the setbacks and the additional laneway. So that's correct.
I see. So if that wasn't seeded, then the ratio would remain essentially around about 2.5. Is that the...
That's correct.
Thank you. The other point that was made, I think, was that in regard to heritage, that was on page 27, exceptional outcomes. Would that be the same sort of system you'd use to increase perhaps the plot ratio so that the applicant could get, more, further bonus stories? Would that be the same system?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. No, I don't believe that's provided for in the LDP.
Any further questions on C3? Councillor Powell?
I don't know whether this is better discussed now or in the next agenda item. It's regarding the transformer, which I noticed down at the affected the end of 6.2 when it was talking about laneways and the ability to gain further concessions. Would it be best to discuss that from staff? Would it be best to discuss it here or discuss it in the next item where you've referred, where it's also referred to?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Taylor. I guess what the best way to distinguish it is this item is setting up a strategic framework which subsequent development applications can be considered with. So this is essentially the first step, so it's probably worth discussing it now.
Okay. It does appear to be rather a specific material item in what is a policy. So I was wondering about whether we should have something so specific and which almost appears to relate to a specific site in a policy.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, it's good to provide specifics as much as you can, as it provides some certainty to at least applicants, developers and the community on what is expected.
Okay. And the reason why I was asking that is because the State Design Review Panel in the next item says that it doesn't consider that should be the case, that if the transformer is to be relocated, it should be relocated to Crown land and shouldn't be at the expense of any applicant, which I think is not the same stance that's been taken by this report, by this policy.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. I take that on note from the State Design Review Panel. They're not decision makers and they're not generally planners.
So, councillors, if there's no further questions on C3, I'll move to C4. So C4, 385 Rockaby Road, State Development Assessment Unit referral. It's on page 31 of your agenda, but you may have received it as a separate attachment. I mean, not attachment, a separate amended agenda. Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And look, I've got lots of bits and pieces here, but let's start with the transformer. The applicant suggests that the cost of moving that transformer is between $250,000 and $500,000, thereby suggesting it's a prohibitive cost and shouldn't be just the responsibility of one developer. So I wondered if we had any idea of what that cost would be and whether that is a realistic amount that has been suggested? Thank you, through you, Mayor.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. Normally those costings are provided through a formal quote from Western Power. We haven't received that, and generally we ask for applicants and developers to undertake that. But I would say that it's probably generally consistent with the costings. They could be around that figure.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may continue, so 250 to 500 is a big jump. Do you think it's closer? I mean, do we have any idea? We've gone through a recent experience with Subiaco 1 and the movement of that transformer. Seems like it's about the same size. Do we have any idea of what that cost was?
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, that's something that we're still discussing with the other applicant and Western Power. The difficulty is that Western Power provide a 50% variation on their costs, so it can sometimes be very difficult to nail it down and justify it. So, I mean, it could be around that figure. It could be less than 200. It could be quite a bit more.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Can we find out? Is that something that we can, or does it entirely depend on where it's going? Does it? Okay, I'll move on. Thank you. My next question involves attachment 1, where we're talking about the dilapidation reports, and first on page 1, which is page 260 of PDF, we talk about for a building permit, and we've mentioned 399 Rockaby Road, which, for the interest of everyone, is actually the Scout Hall. And I know they're particularly interested in the protection of the Scout Hall. So it's mentioned, so it's listed under building permit, but then it's not listed in section 5 for a building permit. And I just wondered if that was just an oversight, and if so, if we could include 399. Thank you.
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, we'll double check that and update the report if need be. I know that it's included in the figure in the report, but we will double check that it's noted in the condition.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Another question is, it relates to where the applicant suggests that the development is close to the Subiaco railway station. Now, working on Todd principles, usually that's about an 800 metre radius. Has that changed at all? So that's my first question. Thank you.
Through Mayor Taylor, if you're talking about the high frequency bus routes or close to railway stations, 800 metres is still correct.
Thank you. So in actual fact, this development is 1.2 kilometres. So it really is outside that 800 metre Todd principle. And I just feel it could be something that we should point out because it's misleading to suggest it's close to a railway station when it's not. And it's 1.4 kilometres from Dalgleish Station. And relevant to that, page 36, table 12, response to objectives of mixed use. And then moving on to page 35, point N. We're moving on to officer recommendation in our agenda 3B, where we're actually asking for a reduction to the on-site car parking. And I wondered what sort of reduction we're asking and why, given it's not within a TOD site. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. While it's not within the TOD site, for example, it still exceeds the parking requirements under the city's local planning scheme. So there is an additional amount of car parking bays, and what we feel is that these additional bays actually take up space that could potentially be deep soil or landscaping, which would provide an additional buffer. And then you could also have a reduction of dwelling yield as well, which would assist with the plot ratio discretion that is being sought. So generally in developments, everything's interlinked. When you start chipping away at some things, you can get some better setbacks, deep soil in there, and you're starting to reduce height and plot ratio, for example. And the development is still over and above what the minimum car parking requirements are in our scheme.
So I don't understand the deep soil concept unless we're reducing the whole size of the building, because isn't all the parking just coming in underneath the building? So where if we reduce the parking, would it create more deep soil?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, on the basement level, as you can see, there's a small area of deep soil proposed on the southwestern corner, and then there's a whole line of parking bays that go along, which essentially butt up against the laneway or the right-of-way. So that could be a further extension of deep soil zone if those car parking bays are removed.
Thank you, and I have one more question. Thank you, through you, Mayor. The officer recommendation refers to the parklet and the pedestrianisation of part of the laneway. Now, the landowner is the city of that area, and consent has to be sought. So that's what obviously it says in the officer recommendation. But I wondered, how does this work as this progresses to the SDAU? And for example, where in attachment 1 you've said if it is the view of the SDAU to approve this development, then these are the things we want to make sure of. And so you draw attention to those, to the parklet and the pedestrianisation, and by doing so, it's almost like giving consent. And I just wonder what the process was, and at what point do they need to get consent before the SDAU rely on those particular community benefits? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. I'll try to summarise this as quickly and as simply as I can. So the LDP has a requirement for community benefits to consider a number of things, and what we understand is that for those community benefits to be realised, the laneway needs to be included in the application. The city is the management body of the laneway as it's a road, so it's not a freehold lot, it's a road reserve. So that would essentially need to be signed off by the city to be considered. And then when it's included in the application, it's a bit easier for the SDAU to either require that to be undertaken through a condition of approval and as it's shown on the plans. So the process would generally be that if this recommendation does go to the SDAU and they would like to see that occur, then they can provide some strong advice to the applicant to include the city as the right-of-way in the application, and then that would form part of the application and can be implemented through the conditions.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, and it leads on well from Councillor Stroud, and it's a bit more of an overarching perspective, because the workshop that we attended which discussed this, we talked about that very thing, as in, given that this is an SDAU process, we're not super familiar with it. This is the first one that we've done. If we want the SDAU to seriously consider the feedback that we as the City of Subiaco are giving it, what's the best way to do that? And that was discussed. Kind of primarily at the workshop. So I was a little surprised because the impression that I got in terms of the summary from the workshop was that we wanted to make it very clear that there was some key things that we thought the development needed to include in the city's report, so that should it go as feedback to the SDAU, it's very clear what's wanted. So my understanding was that we were looking for, given that this is, for want of a better way of saying it, a joint one between council and staff, as opposed to a staff recommendation, that council can have a different position as like we do in an RAR. I did think we were kind of going for supported with conditions and then firmly doing our conditions. So then it's very easy to say if those conditions aren't approved by the SDAU, of course we don't approve it at the minute. And then at the minute we don't have to do that. So I was just kind of wondering what happened in between the workshop and this report, because this report, and there's a number of things that I don't recognise from the workshop, specifically things particularly on page 7, like heritage. This proposal is inconsistent with the local planning framework. And then down the bottom in strategic planning, this proposal is not supportable from a strategic planning perspective. If that was the case in our workshop, then that would be a much probably shorter workshop because if it's not supportable, it's not supportable. Whereas we had quite a long workshop where we did say exactly some of the key concerns of council that would have to be addressed in considering in any way supporting this. So I'm just wondering what happened between that workshop and this report.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, that feedback from that workshop was presented to the applicant and the SDAU in a meeting called a Development Assessment Forum. So that included the feedback regarding the consistency with the LDP, the relocation of the transformer, deep soil zones, and a range of other matters. Those minutes, that meeting, I should say, was then up to the applicant to go from there and make any changes or do anything that they sought to address those matters, and they really didn't do too much. So we were left with the application as it was submitted and a requirement to provide a response to the SDAU. That doesn't mean that the applicant can't come back and in negotiations with ourselves and the SDAU make further changes and we can make comments. So all those matters raised were provided to the applicant. They made I don't think they made any changes, and we're commenting on the same plans that were prepared. The strategic planning's reaction is really about the inconsistency with an LDP, which is subject to consideration next week.
So where's any of that in here? Like in terms of the process of how council works, where's that in the history of how this has been discussed? Because then I wouldn't have to ask the question, for one. And I just am wondering, like we have the workshop, we talk about the key things that as council, and I think the phrase that you use is, you seek guidance from council on how it's going to go. I'm just wondering if then you changed what your thoughts were as discussed at the workshop to be different. I don't see that reflected in the officer's report, and I'm wondering, did I misread it, or did you just kind of go, oh, they weren't going to do it anyway, so we changed our approach?
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, at the strategic workshop, we did discuss that a development assessment forum was coming up, so all the points were provided to the applicant and the SDAU at that development assessment forum. We can't control if the applicant changes their plans or not, so we had to provide comment on the plans that were presented to us.
Sure, but the plans are the same as what was presented to the workshop. That's correct?
That's correct, and I think at the workshop we said that we did not support the application as it was currently presented, and we were aiming towards the changes that we considered with elected members.
Sure, and that's that. I guess it's the way of which way around you put it. In that we want to make it clear, and I think that's which is why I said we sort of fed on from Councillor Stroud's questions. Should the SDAU contemplate approving this, whatever, given that we're a stakeholder and giving our feedback, we did want to make it very clear what we wanted. So rather than just saying we don't support it and it's not supportable, we wanted to say how this could work. And I guess we get to that at point 3, but from the discussions at the workshop, this isn't really quite how I thought this was this isn't really the takeaway from the workshop, and you're saying that you changed that because of the meeting that was had. But what I'm getting at is we as elected members who are in that workshop, as far as I can see, wouldn't be able to sort of look at how that thought process of a planning approach changed. And I guess a couple of other points that sort of feed into where I'm coming from, like point D, 2D, the impact of the proposal on the adjacent Duke Street heritage area. I don't think we kind of just discussed that even at the workshop, whereas that's now point 4, and we don't get to saying what we actually need the building to do, and and that is to be consistent with the development standards. So that's just what I'm getting at. We kind of wanted. The impression I got from the workshop, and I'm happy for you to, I'm sure other councillors who were there may have other comments. The way the workshop, we discussed it, we wanted it to be very clear on what were the key things that council saw as either, if you want to put it in the negative, you could say problematic, or you could say needed to be addressed to make this supportable. And those elements there was a strong desire out of the workshop for that to be really clear. So that was my overarching question on what happened between the workshop and the report. Any other questions on C4? Councillor Powell.
Small thing, Mayor Taylor, and I guess I've noticed this a few times over the past few years, but in the final wrap-up of the report, it talks about always talks about strategic implications and so forth. And it says strategic implications. There's no strategic implications for this report. But then if we look back at page 37, it's got strategic planning that it's not supportable from a strategic position. So I don't know why that doesn't play out in the final sum up. I've noticed this more than once. And then same with social and environmental implications. There's apparently not enough deep soil area provided. That's surely an environmental implication to the report. I'm just curious about that.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. The strategic implications generally in council reports refer to the strategic community plan. Local planning strategic implications are considered separately, so they are addressed, and the environmental concerns as well are addressed. It's just not addressed twice, I would say, so it reduces the reporting and is considered in the planning implications.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor. In the attachments, there's quite a brief from the State Design Review panel and its finding on the development, and it seems to be in contrast with what the council officers have found. In fact, it is quite fulsome in its support of the proposal, saying that most of the variations in regard to plot ratio, height, etc., it says are minor. Does the council need to address what has been provided by the State Design Review panel in its submission?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. The council's position and submission is generally provided in the recommendation and the attachment. That covers most of the discrepancies between what we feel and the design review panel feels, and that's the state design review panel, not the city's. In any event, the SDRP or the design review panel are an informing body to the Western Australian Planning Commission. So that's their design advice. It's not planning advice and an assessment of the planning framework. So that needs to sit separately. I don't think you need to provide any additional points, or I don't think there needs to be a pointed disagreement with the design review panel. Council's position is very clear in the officer recommendation and the attachments that follow.
Further questions on C4? Councillor Stroud?
Yes, I wanted to ask about the State Design Review Panel, because this is all just so new to us in the practice of the SDAU. So looking up the State Design Review Panel, I understand that they draw from a cast of 50 members. Does the city have any idea who actually sat on this design review panel to do this assessment? And if so, is there any crossover with our own design review panel members? Thank you. Through you, Mayor.
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor. Yes, the city was invited to the State Design Review Panel as an observer and to provide some context on the planning framework. There were a couple, and I don't think there were any crossovers, but there would be in the general pool. There may have been one or two, but the panels sometimes changed.
And am I right in understanding, thank you through you, Mayor, that same group of panel members will stay with the particular assessment as it goes backwards and forwards?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, I believe this process for the State Design Review Panel has probably finished. I'm not sure if the Planning Commission will refer it again. There was generally the same people in the room.
And thank you, Mayor. Now, the only information I could find, but there's a lot of attachments to go through, was just one page. Just one page from this design review panel. Is that? It seemed more like a summary page. Is that all we were actually provided to understand how they actually analysed the application? Thank you. It's titled 4-point design review, 4.1 State Design Review Panel, but it's effectively one page on page 18.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, the city did receive a summary of the final outcome of the State Design Review Panel, but it wasn't included in the submission, so it was very similar to what was attached there.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. So would that be available to us? Because I'm just really trying to understand this. SDAU is just such a new process, and I'm just trying to get an understanding of just how it all works and how the State Design Review Panel actually analysing such a project and so on. Is that available to elected members? Thank you.
Through Mayor Taylor, yes, we can provide the additional summary. It's a couple of dot points under each element, but no, that's no worries. We can provide it to elected members following this meeting.
Councillor Hammersley?
Thank you. Yes, picking up on something said earlier that the State Design Review Panel are looking at the design of the building and they're not giving a planning assessment. Can I just have a bit of clarity on that? Does that mean they look at the building as a building, not in its context, and just say that's a good building for people to live in? Is that what their role is?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, it's not just that. There is one design element or a couple of design elements in ARCO's Volume 2 and SPP 7 which look at context and character, built form and scale. So they would generally consider the building in its context and its surroundings and so forth. So that is a consideration. What they wouldn't do is make an assessment under the planning framework and the legislative framework that applies to that area or that site.
Okay, so, all right, so, I've lost it, I'll leave that one. Another question though, just looking on page 32 where the recommendations continue, and in 3D, the provide community benefit. So I think as I read this, it's we generally don't support because this doesn't fit with our local development plan. I think that's the overall theme, but then it goes on to say if there is to be an approval, we would want to see some additional things, so A, B and C, and then we get down to community benefit. And I think we have talked a bit about this whole idea of community benefit being provided on public land, and this seems to be an acceptance of that concept. Now, am I right that we've had that happen on one occasion so far in the city, is in Subiaco 1, where part of their public benefit was making a contribution to changes to Seddon Street public open space, a public road. Is there any others that this has occurred?
This is the public contribution from developers, isn't it? So Subiaco Centro would have a number of examples.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, there's probably a number of examples across Perth where applicants and developers provide their contribution on public land, and then that's then taken by the local government. Public art is just one example of that. So yeah, look, there are other examples. I guess going back to your original comment, point 3D is a request that the DPLH seek amended plans that consider all these issues. And yeah, that's where that is.
Right, yes, I understand, because they're not in there at the moment. Is that right? Yep, thank you. I was just wondering, I might have missed this somewhere. It might be in all the stuff and in the discussions that we had. Do we have any sense of what the monetary cost would be of making that sort of contribution to upgrading the public realm?
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, well, that really depends on the type of upgrading and the nature of it. So we don't have a sense at the moment, but it's something that if it was actually put in a development application and included, we could work with the applicant to understand the level of detail and what's required on that. So it could be a substantial figure if you know something quite substantial is provided. In that, we'd consider a number of things such as whole of life costs and maintenance that the city would then need to undertake.
And just finishing off, it also, at the end there, it says further consideration should also be given to providing further community benefit on the subject site. Again, I might have missed this in all the detail. Have we expanded on what our thinking is in terms of what that might be, or is it necessary for them to perhaps go back and have a pretty good look at their plans and come up with some ideas themselves? Is that what we would imagine?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, we have provided some incentives in our local development plan for them to consider, and they would need to consider a range of options and other ones. What we would say is that most of the community benefits provided, or at least proposed by this application, are on public land. So it's probably appropriate that if they are some on public land, they should be some on private land. It should be a mixture as well.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't, through you, Mayor, I couldn't get any sense, I'm sure it's in there, but it's hard to wade through, any sense of the quality of the apartments in terms of their size. And so I just wondered if you could give an idea there. And I mean, I understand there are 1, 2 bedroom and 3 bedroom, but you know, are they rooms that you couldn't swing a cat in, or are they reasonably generous? I do understand that they are offering a ceiling height of 3.2, which is quite a generous ceiling height, but I couldn't get any idea of the size of the rooms. And I also want to ask, is that something that is considered in the Principle 6, the amenity? I didn't have time to look that up. I assume it is, when the design review panel, because they go from an orange to a green, so and I think they also assess the size of the balconies, because sometimes balconies, you can't even put a chair in, they're so small. So do we have a sense of the quality? Because there are, I think there are 37 units, and there's nothing on the ground floor. So in 5 stories, there are 37 units, but I think the 2 top floors are almost penthouse in size. So we might be squeezing a lot of units in. Thank you.
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, that was something that would be considered in further detail by the State's Design Review Panel and also the WAPC. There were some minor issues noted with the functionality and build quality of some of the apartments, and I think there was a note in there about removing an apartment might assist in that. We didn't see too many issues in our high-level assessment of the application with that, and we just noted that most of those comments come through the SDRP. And would likely be undertaken by the applicant as better apartments generally have a better economic sale value.
Now, if we wanted to add to this assessment, is it just by way of, through you, thank you, Mayor, is it just by way of an amendment to your report next week? Is that how we're going to work it? Thank you.
Through Mayor Taylor, I think that it would have to be an amendment, yeah.
No, this is a different process. So this is almost like a joint one as opposed to an officer's report and then the council's decision. This will be the council's submission. Any further questions on C4? Yes, Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Look, maybe I've misunderstood this, but I thought it was from page 303 in the attachments to around about page 320 that was the State Design Review Panel report addressing Perth Peel, addressing the LPS 5 and all sorts of matters. I didn't think it was one page, but maybe if you could take a look, maybe I'm mistaken.
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, that's the applicant's submission. So in the applicant's submission, they included 1 page of their progression to date of the DRP. We've subsequent to that received the final DRP summary.
So councillors, we will debate this in full, no doubt. Any further questions? If not, I'll move on to C5. Development WA referral, Roberts Road, public realm and landscaping works, C5. Any questions on this from councillors? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor, and through you. I do have several questions, but I can split them up so other people get a chance to speak in between times. one of the, might be jumping over the ground a little bit. There's the change rooms that are going to be built. They're said to be temporary. So presumably that is when and if the waffle moves back and they provide change rooms to some of the sporting codes. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Taylor, the change rooms would be linked to any development that the city may consider on the Seasmurf site. I would say so. It's ensuring that any public facilities are on land that the city will eventually own and manage.
Thank you, Mayor. To continue, there's one of the development sites which is outside this landscaping plan, and that's it's called Lot 11519, and there's a picture of it on PDF page 789 if anyone wants to look in the attachments. But it's basically the lot that is to the west of the extension of Subiaco Road, just in that corner there. And there are three, well, 2 or 3 figs. I think there's 3 there presently, and they're not. They seem to be part of the lot, and I just, I'm not. Maybe I did see the subdivision plan. I'm not sure, but there was talk about those figs being in the public realm, whereas it appears now they're part of that lot. Is that correct?
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, they're actually not included as part of this development application. So I don't think there's been any change to the master plan and the location of the figs in a reserve. They're just not being considered at the moment.
Thank you. If you wouldn't mind, if you could just look at that PDF page 789, Manager of Planning Services, and it's actually outlines the lot and the figs are within there. So I know, and I did put the preamble to my question that I know that they're not part of this landscaping plan and development application, but it doesn't really make much sense if they're going to be part of the public realm, why that is not part of this application. So that's what I just want to clarify once and for all, if you know whether it's going to be public realm or whether it's in the private, or it's in the domain of the lot and therefore the developer. And then that leads on to the question of how can those trees be protected? Thanks.
Thank you. And through Mayor Taylor, they are included in the lot boundary, and I was looking at that that page. They're included in the general lot boundary for the lot that includes Subiaco Oval. So while they're included in there, you don't have to have the whole DA apply to that part. So they're not proposing to do that. Whether or not that changes, that will be subject to a future application. And the city's advice is always that trees of that significance should remain within Crown land, because that provides the best protection and maintenance of those trees. We have heard that there might be a potential relocation of one of those trees, but that's something that the city and the council has objected to from day dot and will continue to, because the retention of the trees in their current location is the best outcome for them.
Thank you. There's a lighting plan in page 772 of PDF page 772 of the attachments, and there doesn't appear to be any lights around the southern edge of the oval where there's that path. I don't know whether I'm just misinterpreting that or whether they're going to, even if we're relying on light coming off the future buildings there. I just wondered what the plan is for the lighting there, because with the proposed shared use agreement, you know, the public use of the oval on many occasions will be in the evening. And anyway, thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. If you zoom in, there looks to be some feature lights on surrounding that oval, so there might be some lighting in that. There are obviously the light towers on the oval as well, and for the remainder of that area, it would probably be subject to the development application. It's really hard. It looks like it's kind of within and then sometimes outside of that boundary, but I guess the lighting would all need to be subject to Australian standards in any event to ensure that it's adequate.
Yep, further questions on C5?
Thank you. I've got more. There's a reference to, in the conditions on page 34 of the agenda, oh, actually, that might be the old numbering. Was that before that report? So I'm looking at the old printed copy. The conditions, condition 6, a sustainable design assessment report will be prepared. For whose benefit is that, just out of interest, is that being prepared? Is that for the city's benefit to make sure that all this design is sustainable so that the city can afford it, etc.? Or what are the aspects that are being covered? Thanks.
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, that would be in accordance with the planning framework set out through the Subiaco redevelopment scheme. So they've got a development policy. So we're just, I guess it's a recommendation. It's a double assessment as you wish, but we ensure that the development WA planners don't miss it, and we assess it under their framework.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. This landscaping, it's all looks very nice, but it looks like it's going to be pretty expensive to maintain. Do we have any idea of, what it's going to cost, and we'll need more staff or whatever to deal with all this, because it's pretty a pretty complex sort of a design. Nothing wrong with that, but it probably is going to be fairly labour intensive. Thank you.
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, through the city's response on the master plan, there needs to be an agreement for the handover of the public realm and infrastructure, and that's considering when there's rateable properties on there, so the city can then use those resources. At this moment, we're also looking at a maintenance schedule for Development WA for a minimum of 2 years, which is generally a minimum of 2 summers. So that's all to be worked out. What I would say is that through the process, the city's officers have been working collaboratively with Development WA and have been included in understanding and providing recommendations for species, materials and matters that the city should be able to maintain appropriately and cost effectively.
Thank you. Is there any idea, and perhaps it's in the documentation, but there's a lot, I didn't read every word, how long, the estimate for the construction of all these works, how long it's going to take?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, they are estimated to be completed around at the same time as stage 2 of Bob Hawke College is completed and opens, and that's to tie in the Green Link. So if I'm not mistaken, that's for the school year of 2020, commencing 23. Thank you, Councillor Hammersley. Yeah, get my dates mixed up. So they should be completed then, and there's a lot of work going on between Bob Hawke College and Development WA in tying in, so lay down spaces and so forth can be programmed and everything open at the same time as the school. It would need to be the Green Link that is developed last, given that that's where the school construction's going on. So yes, 2023, start of the school year. One
final question, Mayor, if I may. There's a reference in the officer recommendation about 1G, about the city requires clarification on specific location, tree species and number of the trees required to be removed. So where is that mentioned in the DA or the documentation about the removal of trees? And if it's not in there, what information do you have about trees that are to be removed? If you do have any specific information, thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, that's likely to be in areas such as Subiaco Road where there needs to be additional work and maintenance done. I don't have that specific information at the moment, but it was not really there in the DA, so to ensure that it's captured, we've put that condition in.
I just have a quick question, which hopefully will be easy. On the first page of, or the second page of recommendations, page 33, I'm not sure what it is now. It talks about amending the umpire change room to have only one shower and one toilet. Are we changing the extra toilet to a storage room? Because without sounding silly, shortage of toilets is a thing. So I just wondered if we're moving that, because we talk about the store area to be increased by 20 square metres, and I just was wondering if we're losing a toilet is probably the shortest way of asking.
No, and that's fine, and through you, Mayor Taylor, what I would say is that once this progresses, the community building would be subject to a separate development application with more detail. So this is the early feedback, and it was rearranging the toilets so that they were accessible from inside the change room, so people who were in there didn't have to go all the way around. And then generally there's mainly one umpire in any event, so that's why it was changed.
So I'm appreciating that. I'm just thinking, did you just make the door accessible so we didn't lose a toilet? Because the impression that I got was maybe we didn't lose a toilet, so we didn't lose a toilet, we just changed the doors.
I think we may have lost one or two toilets, but there were I think 5 on each side, for example. So there was both a reconfiguration and probably a loss of one.
Just to follow up from Councillor Jennings' question about Development WA maintaining the landscaped area for 2 years, should there need to be an extension of that time? Do you foresee any problems with that or any likely objection from Development WA? Sorry, through you, Mayor Taylor.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. 2 years and 2 summers is a standard period in development applications, which is generally accepted throughout the development industry, so I don't see any issues coming out of that.
Any further questions on C5? I'll move then to... Oh, you do? Yep.
Reduction in the speed limits for other areas. Sorry, did you hear that question? Or
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, I don't believe it is going to be reduced, no. I don't believe it's going to be reduced as part of this.
If there's no further questions, I'll move to C6, Draft Amended Local Planning Policy 3.4, Development Guidelines for Residential Areas, Finalisation, Post-Advertising. Any questions on C6? Councillor Powell.
yes, thank you, Mayor. Just taking a look at the attachments again, page 845. It's the requirements within this policy. The provisions relevant to the precinct policy will apply to developments within a heritage area. However, should there be any inconsistency between the provisions of this policy and the residential design codes, the provisions of this policy will prevail. I'm just interested to know how policy can override design, can be preeminent over design codes. Could you give me an explanation of that, please?
Through Mayor Taylor, I might have to take this one on notice for a change. I do believe that this policy is probably different as it's policy relating to heritage and guidance for residential heritage areas, which there are other considerations. In general, most of our policies are consistent with what might be provided. So the R codes does allow local governments to change some aspects, so it's probably referencing those aspects that are allowed to be changed and have been changed, and that's where this policy would prevail, but we will double check that, and if there's anything that's different, we'll let you know before next week.
Further questions on C6? We'll move then to C7, interim review of local planning policies following amendments to planning and development local planning schemes regulations. Any questions on C7? Okay, yep.
Thank you, and I'll answer your questions bottom up. There's no changes to the delegations and the number of objections, so this is not changing in this policy. That's a delegation, and the LPS regulations don't allow for the local government to not consider submissions from wherever they are, wherever they come from. So they can be considered from other properties which haven't been written to. And the other question is, yes, the letters will be for minor applications sent to the adjoining owners and occupiers only.
Any further questions on C6? Are we on C7? Sorry, my mistake. Any further questions on C7? No, we'll then move to C8. The RAR for 154 Hay Street and also on Evan Street aren't here tonight, but will be coming to the next meeting. So we'll move to C10, proposal to change method of election of the mayor, community consultation results. Any questions on C10? We'll move then to Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. Yes, I've got some questions about whether we could have some additional information added to the report. Background is that what we are required to do under the statute is to actually consider the proposal that was put to us by petition. So my first question is, could we please have the proposal with its reasons added to the report?
Yes, that information.
Thank you. The next question is whether we could also add to the report the number. We were told last time this is just to draw it all into one place so we don't have to go back finding it in other reports, but we were told in the last time this matter was before us how many of the proponents were actually validly entitled to petition, because I think it wasn't all of them, but it was over 250. So if we could have that number included. The other matter is we've had 118 submissions in support of election by council, but I'm wondering how many of those people are the same people who made the petition, and if we could have that information. The next matter is, of all the people who have put in submissions, do we have any information as to whether, and this is for and against, whether they are in fact electors of the community or people from other places? The next one is probably the most important one, because we are tasked with what is in fact a quantitative analysis of the submissions that have been put. And I noticed in the report that people were given the opportunity to give reasons, and I gather some of them did. So could we have a list of the reasons that were put for and against the proposition, so that we can consider that against the proposal that was put? And I think that would be it. Thank you.
Councillors, if I could just make a comment on that point. There's approximately 11,000 electors, I believe, or thereabouts. You've had approximately 1% of the people who support this proposal, which seems to me to be extraordinarily low and does not justify the amount of work that you're now proposing to try to come to a different position, if that's what you seek to achieve. The information that you're seeking will take many hours of officer time. For example, if you're suggesting that we need to compare each name on the proposal with the submission we received a couple of months ago, that will take dozens of hours, I would suggest, because they're not in any particular order and they're not on a computer database, so they can't simply be sorted into a logical order either. And it seems to me that we're trying to make this overcomplicated, given that it's for 1% of the number of electors of the city.
Yeah, my questions were whether we could do it. I'm just one person. These are information as a decision maker of what is a fundamental statutory right of our community. And that's just information as a decision maker I would like to have. If I can't have it, I can't have it. But I think it's fair enough to raise it. And that brings me to perhaps something that I wouldn't have raised before receiving that response. But last month we sat in this chamber and were told that opt-in things were not things. So
Sorry, and on tonight's report, yep.
My question is, what are we, there's nothing in this report about the problems with opt-in, and yet it is a problem because we know for a fact that there's been lobbying on both sides of this question, and we're sitting here as just 12 people trying to decide whether or not our community should get a vote about their vote. So, my question is, why is that not that consideration not in the report and part of our thinking?
Again, councillor, we're looking at a very low response to this question. If you are seeking the officers to provide the level of detail that you are seeking, I will be recommending to the council that the council makes that decision on whether I should be allocating resources to find that information out and provide it. Personally, I think it's information for the sake of information, and you'd be making the job more difficult than it needs to be.
Any further questions on C10? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I suppose following up on Councillor Hammersley's question, in a previous process, it was important to determine who were electors and who weren't, apparently, and I don't disagree with that. So I would like to say, what is the difference between that process and this process, where we should, if it's the electors and residents who should have a say, that is the basic information that I think is necessary to make this decision. And I'm not sure that the qualitative responses will be that influential, but having said that, under the Act, we are required to consider the submissions. If we haven't got that information, then we're not properly considering the matter as required by statute. Thanks.
Through the chair, I believe you do have the relevant information to consider. There's less than half of the number who signed the petition have responded in an affirmative way to require for the position to be put. That, to me, gives you a resounding position in which to make a decision on this matter.
Councillor Powell.
Taking into account the resources that may be required, would it be possible at least to have a summary of the arguments for and against?
We'll have a look at that in terms of if we can pull something together that it gives an indication of whether the person was in favour or against, whichever option, and if they provided a comment.
If there's no further questions on C10, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. I understand that the timing for this matter, if the decision was to go to a poll, is very time sensitive. So if Council did instruct the acting CEO to give the information about whether it was electors and which of the respondents were electors and residents, and that has to be subject to a council resolution, what effect will that have on complying with conducting the poll, etc., in terms of the statutory time periods and requirements? Thank you.
I'd have to take that on notice, but it would clearly be very tight. And I'm not sure that the proposal sought that information in any event, whether the person was an elector or an owner. It would be a question of doing another manual check, which would consume more resources.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Could I just direct that question to the Director of Corporate Services? It was my understanding that the submission form, which I have seen, that was put up on the website for people to complete, contained boxes to tick. What's your connection to Subiaco, which was business owner, elector, resident, and that was what your connection was. And there's also an address provision which people, of course, did not have to complete. So if it would be, I can't think that it would be extremely time consuming to just tabulate the people who have stated in a submission form, their connection to Subiaco if they completed that form on the submission form. So is that information in the submission form, just to clarify for the CEO? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Taylor. In terms of what people have completed on the nomination form, that is self-nomination, so we could go through and collate that. I think what the CEO is referring to is if we were then going to try and cross-check that against the other information that was submitted for the proposal, that's where the problem lies. But in terms of tabulating where people have self-nominated, because that's all they've done, we wouldn't have cross-checked it or anything like that. If they have self-nominated, then we could collate that information.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. This raises the question of why did we bother to put those choices and options for completion in the submission form if they were not going to be used or checked? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Taylor. The proposal that was submitted, the requirements under the Act for that is that it has to be so many actual electors. In relation to the next stage, which is what the proposal calls for, and we have to go out for public submissions, that does not require anyone making a submission to be an actual elector, which is why we wouldn't cross-check them back to the original proposal that was submitted. So the first point is to make sure there's enough electors that have submitted the proposal. In terms of the way the survey but the submission form was collected, as I said, it's a self-nomination. It's not cross-checked or linked to any kind of database in the background. So we can tabulate that information based on what they've nominated. But if they haven't put in an address, say, for example, then we got nothing to be able to check to say if the nomination they've made is actually valid. But we could at least tabulate them, which is, I think, what you're actually asking for.
Just thinking out as information has come to hand that it's a problem for the administration to do this work in the time frame. It struck me that another possibility is simply to put the forms in PDF and put them in the secure, confidential part of the council's thing, and if people want to look at them, they can, and if they don't, they don't, and then the work doesn't have to be done by admin. So is that a sensible suggestion or not?
It's certainly easier from the administration's point of view, through the chair.
Well, you've already given them the petition.
Look, I'll just need to take that on notice and have a look at it. They're not actually PDFs in terms of the submissions, so I just need to have a look at how that actually is, but I understand the point that you're making.
Further questions on C10? We'll move then to C11, self-supporting loan for the Regal Theatre. Any questions on C11? Councillor de Vries.
Sorry, very simple question. In the event that there's difficulty paying back the principal and the interest repayments, what kind of support or alleviation would we give to the Regal Theatre? It doesn't sound like it's impossible. Obviously, there's a plan put in place, but just as a query in case something like COVID came back, which we know it won't, but just in case.
Director Morton.
Through you, Mayor Taylor. Basically, I've talked to the Regal Theatre in relation to their cash flows and looked at structuring a self-supporting loan, which they feel very comfortable that they can meet, which is why it's, I think, quarterly payments and set out how it is. If there was an issue, say we had another lockdown period because of COVID and therefore they had to cancel some events or delay events, what we've discussed is they'd come back, raise that with us like any other party that we have an arrangement with, and that we might look at deferring the payment or delaying the payment until they've got cash flows coming back in. But we don't know what's necessarily going to happen in the future. They're confident that they can meet the payments, and that would be the kind of arrangements that we'd look at, but we'd come back to council if there was an issue for council to consider it at that point in time.
Yeah, thank you. Just carrying on from that, would I be right in assessing that were the worst case scenario to happen and the Regal Theatre weren't able to service the loan or pay back the principal, although we never wanted our people not to pay their debts, would I be right in thinking this would not be a material hit for the City of Subiaco?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, all depends what you would deem material. Under the arrangement, you would expect that the Regal Theatre would be able to, like they're going to start and they're going to be able to make payments. At some point where they defaulted, we'd come back and have a look at it. But as a self-supporting loan, that loan sits initially with the city, so it's the city's loan, and then we have an agreement with the Regal Theatre or whoever we have a self-supporting loan in terms of them making the payments and repaying them. So if they defaulted and we couldn't come to an arrangement where those payments were, say, deferred and then the loan just paid off later, we would then have to consider that through either a budget review or budget process to how we accommodate that, because we would still be required to make the payments, the overarching payments for the loan, because the loan sits with the City of Subiaco.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Mayor. This will be a quick one. The toilets that will be installed, the first lot, are open to the public. Will these new female toilets also be available to members of the public?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, the upgrades to the female toilets are within the Regal Theatre. So the first toilet is a unit that is actually open to the outside of the building, so is open and accessible all of the time, where the female toilets are open to the public in terms of when the venue is open, because they're internal within the building.
I had a couple of questions. I just wanted to understand how this was working, because I was a little surprised at the lack of detail and I couldn't find any attachments, given that council does seem pretty reluctant to spend money, particularly ratepayers' money, and we do worry about our burden on our future ratepayers as well. The Regal Theatre Foundation Limited, is that the trust or the people operating the company, operating the theatre? Because I understand there's two entities, one that sort of rents out the theatre and manages it from a theatre perspective, and then one that manages the trust and the maintenance, etc.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, it's the trust.
Okay. So does this come under your area, Director Hawkins, and not under community services?
The report is a report from the Director of Corporate Services.
So have the concerns that the City of Subiaco had that were reasonably serious into the governance of the trust, have they been resolved?
the Regal Theatre has made some changes in terms of their structure. In terms of our concerns around their ability to tap into external funding sources like from lotteries and everything, that is because of their structure and the fact that they then lease the commercial operations of the facility to the other party that you were referring to. That does still have an impact in terms of their ability to get loans, funding from external sources like lotteries.
Sure, but my question was around the confidence of the city in the governance structure of the trust and the way that was operating, not in its relation to being able to get grants, but into having confidence in that the trust component and the way the board and governance was structured, that we did have confidence in that, because I mean the Regal Theatre is something that is an asset to the entire city of Subiaco, of course, but when it's been discussed before around how council could support the trust, those concerns have been raised, so I was wondering if they've been addressed.
To my understanding, in terms of what you're referring to, I don't know that those matters have been addressed. In terms of the assessment of their ability to apply for a self-supporting loan for a local government and meet the obligations in terms of that self-supporting loan, that's what we've assessed and ensured that they would be able to meet those commitments. And then we've structured a report so that the project that was envisaged by the city in terms of the external toilets and then the additional project that it put forward could be considered by council.
Any further questions on C11? I'll move then to C12, financial statements. Any questions on C12? Okay, we'll move to C13, independent panel member for the recruitment of the CEO. Any questions on that? Great. Then we'll move to closure of the meeting. I declare the City of Subiaco Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 16th of March 2021 closed at 7:10 p.m. Thank you.